Hello, everyone. Welcome to another Sharing Our Stories segment. And today I'm so excited that we have Pete Johnson here with us today. And he's going to come and talk to us about his story of being a highly intuitive person and his journey and raising children and just his whole path. Once again, the more we share these stories, the more we normalize the whole concept around intuition, having this trait of high intuition, and you can see yourself in others. And so when seeing yourself in Pete, as an adult, or even his story around what you can do with helping to support your child, and what I love that Pete brings to the table is that we get a male perspective. And that's very important because we want to show that everyone everywhere has this trait, and how we all work with it and use it, and that male and female, it doesn't matter. It's out there. It's everyone. And I think we need to bring these conversations forward so that people can start to understand it and not shy away from it or hide away from it. It's not rare. It's not rare like people think it is. 15 to 20% of the population has this trait, but we need to start these conversations. And so, Pete, thank you so much for joining me today for this parent chat conversation about intuition. And I just really appreciate, you can tell people, we'll start off with you telling people a little bit about yourself and your journey as a highly intuitive person, how you noticed how you had these abilities and how it affected you through childhood and up, or when you noticed them, and what you're doing today. So you can take us through your journey.
Okay. Once again, my name is Pete Johnson. I appreciate the opportunity to speak about this because I feel it's so important what you're doing, as so many of us did not have this type of information when we were kind of stepping through this and trying to process it. So that's why I think this is such important work. I was like many, with a kid who just saw everything flying around the bed at night, or was receiving knowledge that I wasn't exactly sure where it was coming from, this type of stuff. And I spent my childhood and my young adult life, and I kind of went through the normal channels of growing up, but there was a lot of confusion with that. And there is, as a child, it can be quite confusing and frustrating when you're trying to process, incoming knowledge, particularly involving people or other situations that you just won't know what to do with.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes it can be a loved one that's saying something that isn't exactly correct or truthful, or whatever this may be. And it poses a lot of questioning. It makes you wonder about things. It questions your ability to interpret the world around you. It can be a little difficult, but I kind of went through that early part of the childhood. I was okay. My parents, it wasn't anything that we discussed or really, I think anybody really knew about. I didn't have siblings that had the skill, but I just kind of pushed my way through it. And I know that as I kind of got to college, I was a little overwhelmed because I was out on my own. And there's a lot of this that, you realize I remember saying, I'm so tired. I just don't want to feel this anymore. Do it. And I'd say this over and over again. And, you try to get help, but people don't know exactly what's going on. I'm in a traditional psychiatric or other setting. So I just kind of continued on. And as, we get older, we get a little more comfortable with ourselves. But I know that when in the business world and when I was starting out, I had no way to tell somebody where information I had was coming from. So I would say, I talked to a buddy, or I heard a friend of mine say, or I would try to disguise the incoming information in some way so that it would be acceptable, rather than saying, well, out of the clear blue sky came the exact directions on how to do something. So I would try to disguise it, bring it in that way, and it worked, and it served me very well in 32 years of business. And I was okay. I knew that I received and heard other information, but the fact was, I didn't feel the need to name it or completely understand it until, I waited a little later. I wasn't married until my mid 40s. And then, kids come along, and then you have that moment when you're like, oh my gosh, there it is.
Mhm.
When you watch your child react in a particular way to a television show or in a social situation or like this, and I was like, oh my gosh, what am I going to do? Because it takes you back to that instant when you were that same child, covering your ears or leaving the room because it was too tense or something of this nature. It was hard. And I know my son kind of came out with a few things in time that was indicating some past life issues, and my daughter was describing an aunt of mine that died in 1970, describing her her United Airlines stewardess outfit to a T. These various things, and as an adult, I realized I have got to get a handle on this. And I knew that I had, used it and employed it and made use of it, but I didn't have really a complete understanding of it. And that's when, I hit around my early 50s, and I was like, I got to get a grip here because I have these two beautiful children. This stuff is going on. I don't want them to feel that kind of isolation and frustration that I did. And so that's when I just literally went on a path to discover and read and do everything that I could with it. And that's how it came to the forefront with me, where um, I knew I could gain some control and understanding if I was able to name things.
Right.
And I knew that I could help the kids because I knew where myself and, I grew up down the street from the Edgar Cayce Center here. And when I learned how to drive, I would sneak off and go to the Edgar Cayce Library because the internet didn't exist in whatever that was, 1976 or something. And, I would sneak off and go in there and I would try to find, well, what is this? I don't know what this is. And I talked to the librarian and that's what I said. I don't want my kids to have that same struggle. I want them to have a kind of a jump start in this and do it. And
Well, Pete, I would just want to back up just a little bit because I think all of this is wonderful, and I want to dive into the kids piece a little bit more. But I want to go back just a little bit more with your story. So you said none of your siblings had this. Do you know? Did it run in your family line at all? Do you know of anyone else in your family that had this type of?
I'm
ability?
not immediately aware. No,
Okay.
my mother was born very late to my grandmother, so most of my cousins are quite significantly older than me. And I really didn't I didn't know, and there was no real discussion of it in the house. And this was, in that day and age, you were just, you were I had no idea how to bring up to my parents what I was seeing or experiencing. And
So did they ever, so you never talk with them about this? So did they ever find out at some point that you had
they did not. My parents have been gone a long time, but it was something that as I said, I'm not even sure how I would have brought it up or explained it. And they were, like all parents, we do our best.
Yeah.
But it was one of those things where it just, even back then, there was no real discussion of it because as I said, in all reality, I didn't know how to describe it.
And
How do you tell somebody you're seeing shadows and stuff? And I would blame my brothers for trying to scare me at night or get behind my bed. And my brothers had been out all night. They weren't there. So it was a lot of confusion. It was a lot of stuff, but it wasn't, I think so much of that frustration, and sometimes kids can have issues with depression and other stuff where these things are concerned. If somebody just could have said, yeah, that's what's going on, not a big deal, that would have made such an incredible difference.
Well, Pete, and that's why these types of conversations and pushing this out for people to hear, because even, for parents to hear it, and then, children will get access, will start as more awareness opens up in parents, but there are children even now who are afraid or can't talk about it and don't know how to bring this up. And I think that's why that's important to hear. I went through that too, growing up in religion. In a religion that didn't embrace mediumship, but this kind of wasn't a conversation that was had. So you do grow up not just kind of pushing it down or not knowing what to do with it or how to work, or you just kind of like deny those skills, deny those abilities and push them aside. So how did you when you were going through school and all of that, did you ever come across anyone else that had this ability that you connected with?
Well, it was when when I got to college and I graduated, and 2 weeks later, I ran off to college and summer school. I needed to get out of the house, and that, as you said, we've got Edgar Casey at the beach, and then we've got CBN and Pat Robertson in Chesapeake, and there's a lot of tension in this area over these things. How can this one area support all these different ideas? So there was a lot of people, and my parents were from a religious tradition, and then it was, once one arena is saying, "Oh my God, what's wrong with you?" And the other arena, I didn't know what to do with it. So I needed to get away from home. I needed to get away from this area, and that's when I went to University of Virginia. And when I got there, I started to realize it's like, wow, I just had a sense that there were some people like me. I don't think even then we really knew what to call it, but you're talking to people, and you say something that you predict something you do, and then you find these people around you. They just kind of, because of a similar vibration or whatever it is, they kind of come around. And that's where I began to realize I have some source of information. I don't know what it is, but I said, okay, I accept that. I'm going to do it. But not everybody wants to hear that. So I also learned at the same time that there are people that you can say that to and people that you cannot at that point in time. So when I got into college and realized, I'm like, okay, I can kind of live with it this way. The biggest issue I had was with some of the empathic stuff, because when I was out, and college is full of parties and bars and fun and this and that, and I knew I couldn't stand to be in a lot of those situations. And I always wondered, what is wrong with me that I can't stand to go to a concert or a bar or stand in a huge group of people or all these things. That was what I really beat myself up about. Not so much about the various sources of information, but the fact that I couldn't stand to be in huge groups. I was overwhelmingly claustrophobic, a lot of things like that really kind of got to me. And that was the thing that so that was my biggest concern, and the biggest way that I beat myself up.
Well, and I'm glad you bring that up, because there are people who experience, I was one of those people just like you, couldn't be in crowds, didn't like large gatherings, tended to be more to myself, didn't understand either why I didn't like being in large groups, and, just what you're saying, had those same sensitivities. So I'm glad this point is coming up, because there's other parents, adults out there who may be experiencing the same thing and don't realize that they could have these empathic abilities too. And if you have a highly intuitive child or empathic child, it's going to be somewhere in the family line that that they're getting it from. And usually it's from a parent or someone immediately within that immediate family line, aunt, uncle, whoever. So that's good to know. And then even seeing that, bringing that point up, looking for that in your child, because we had that in our son and didn't understand it because we hadn't seen it in a child like that before, of having that same kind of sensitivity about being in crowds and being around, not being able to be in groups, and just needing to pull back from things, being sensitive to sounds, loud sounds and things. So I'm glad.
Yeah, well, I think that's, as a parent, that's one of those things to understanding, because my parents or friends would say, come on, get out there, do it, join it. And I felt bad and I couldn't figure out why. But part of this understanding that parents and all the people that you're helping teach and bring this to thing is understand that people may need to be on the periphery, come in for a while, go back out, decompress, come back into however they find to deal with it. That's fine, and that's needed, and it helps. You don't have to be one or the other. I'm not going to be the person in the all-night rave. It's just never going to happen. But the fact of trying to understand that your child may be trying to adjust to the energy in some way. But I really did. I beat myself up a lot about that. And people would, why do you keep leaving? Or I would just leave all of a sudden from some party or concert, or I had to leave. I had to get out, and I just disappeared, ghost everybody. And that was part of what was happening. I got so overwhelmed. I just had to split and just go. And that's where, okay, when you begin to notice your child is vacating the room or doing whatever, there's stuff going on there, and it's okay.
Yeah, that's wonderful. I'm going to go to, so you talked about going into the business world, and so you went into the business world after you got out of college.
Mhm.
So then how did you find that your abilities helped you or you used them there?
Well, it's, there's not, out of all the wonderful stuff that is written even today, as this topic has opened up and become more mainstream, there is very little that talks about psychic skill sets and their use in the business world. And this is part of one of the things that I'm trying to go after personally to do. But it was purely my just kind of um, by chance trying to do something, seeing how I could, I am blessed that I've got a pretty good analytical mind. I love spreadsheets and numbers and this type of stuff. And then I have this other skill set on the side. So I was um, truly think that I was blessed because I worked in an analytical way to help get my skills in what I felt was a repeatable, usable fashion in the business world. Because, if you know, psychic skills are wonderful, but if you cannot repeatedly use them in a validated way, your people are going to be less likely to believe you
And
and support that.
and I just want to, just so people will know when they're watching this, that Pete, which is wonderful, why I wanted to have this conversation with him, because he is in the business world and he has taken his abilities and used them and is applying them there to help within the world of business. And Pete and I were talking, I also have a business background and I used mine in that way. Didn't know what I was actually doing, but it helped me move up the corporate ladder very quickly because I could make intuitive connections and with business decisions and different processes. And I didn't realize how I was using them, but it did help me move up the ladder very, very quickly. So what Pete has done is just that, is taking his abilities and applying them to the business world. And I just want folks to know, because I've said this to many people, when you have this type of highly intuitive trait and this skill set, you don't have to always go out and become a medium, because that may not be your calling. But whatever profession you're called to, you can take it and use it to help you with your creativity, with the decisions that you make, just inform what you do, even for innovations and ideas, concepts, new things, new ways of looking at things that you can bring to whatever, whether it's the arts or music, business, science, whatever. This trait can be used in any field. So it doesn't mean you have to go out and use it just to be, to be a medium or to be a healer. You can bring that intuitive trait into a profession and use it to help elevate whatever you're doing. So that's, I just wanted to set that so
Yeah,
he can tell you more
exactly.
about what he's doing, because I think it's very fascinating.
Because that's where, because there's no rule book on this. So I just simply would begin to kind of test different ways of, one of the biggest issues for business is hiring people, obviously. So, I would start out with various different things, and then I would just have the HR department simply email me a name, nothing else. I didn't know what position, what department, what anything. And I tried to see if I could do anything to help the HR hiring process, how we can make better decisions, people that would be better suited for the jobs. So, those little things that began to make a huge difference. We were making less mistakes hiring. We were choosing better people that were probably more going to be more successful in our culture and in our business. So that was just one little thing that we started to try. And then, of course, business is a zillion different things, helping, with the marketing, how are things going to be perceived, who's going to be around, what's our going to be in a competition in several years, all of those things. And I just began to kind of really write down, take notes, keep track of what was working, what I wasn't so good at, what I might want to improve. And, now over 32 years, there's a lot of it that just comes very second nature. And as I began, I didn't really introduce it out into even though, I'm co-owner of the place, I was still very careful with the information. And as I began to see that things were repeatable and some of the stuff I was saying or predicting was correct, I began to then introduce that out to the other managers and kind of say, here's what we may try. pass on this information. Let's look at that. I'm asking for everybody else's gut reaction because I begin to want them to think it's more than just the resume. It's more than just the numbers. It's more than just what the rational logic would tell us to do in this situation. What does your gut say? What does your gut say? And we go around and it helps bring it. And then secondly, it's different when it's coming from a guy also. People kind of, in some ways, expect women to be very intuitive and to do it, and mother's intuition and all of that. But where a man is concerned, you get a few looks in the beginning. But I wanted to kind of normalize that piece. As the owner, I could say what I wanted to anyway, frankly. So, but it was the issue I wanted from the top down to say, we're okay with this type of thinking here. I want to intuitively have everybody step into issues and growth in this. And that's where it really helps. And I love it when men kind of step up and own it and kind of walk in, and it makes it so much easier for everybody else that, would like to maybe reach beyond what the spreadsheet says and help form some direction or something like that. But that's why I love seeing there's a lot of very intuitive men out there. I've met a lot of them in top business, but a lot of them are not willing to say why they are so successful. They're less likely to bring that topic up. And I would love to see it more known a little bit.
Yeah, and that's why I think these kind of conversations and your willingness to come forward, and the more this information is getting out there, people will, sometimes they don't recognize it in themselves that that's what it is. And I think, to me, I think sometimes like the strategic thinking and that intuitive, like big visioning and all, it has a big foundation in all of these intuitive abilities, this trait of high intuition. And so by starting these conversations, it'll open up people's thinking and say, oh, okay, maybe now I'm understanding more. But you're right, it's different. Females, I do believe, will come forward more and talk about this more than males do. So that's why I'm glad we have your perspective here to bring that out and help people to see, because there's just as many males as females out there that have this. It's just the conversation. So I love how you're using it and how you're encouraging people to check in with themselves for the decisions that are being made, because first of all, we're all intuitive to some degree. We all have it in varying degrees. Those that have it a little bit more can make decisions or look at things in a little different way. So I love how you're bringing that out in your people to bring that to the table. So I'm sure that makes your decision making, it informs it in a different way and probably has a little different weight to how you do things.
Yeah, absolutely. Because it's not so much that it's kind of more buy-in. It's just that people, ultimately, if they're kind of free to express themselves on that intuitive level, also, they're more engaged, and it works. And I said, when you're trying to steer a ship this big, you can't always do it by the map. A lot of times there is no map. So this is where you try to pull it in, and I welcome and people. And we introduce other things in the culture also, where we're teaching the Chinese personality elements right now in the company, in the management area. Are you a wood? Are you a metal? Are you a water? This stuff. And that has made a world of difference in helping people in their interactions to know that, well, that's the way that type of personality structure normally reacts. So I'm going to take that less personally when they do. There's all these places that we try to add it in, and they ate it up. So I think this is where, that was part of my growth and development. Was I realized I didn't, there were certain things I didn't want to do. Some of the traditional work with psychic skill sets was very emotional. I didn't like that because I'm just a guy, and I wasn't as comfortable with that. So I was trying to find ways that I knew I couldn't stuff this stuff down any longer. So I said, I need to find ways where I can express this skill set in ways that suit me, and that ways that I feel are for the betterment of other people. So that's where this kind of came in. And I think you at one time said that your son is very connected to the weather, I believe, didn't you?
Yes.
So, that's what I think. Wouldn't it be incredible if he went to meteorology? So there's that. Can you imagine if he could pull the models apart, figure out, and just make way better predictions because of that built-in connection that he's got here? And this is where I think that's what I try to encourage people. What are some of your psychic connections. What are you good at? Where can you funnel those to and still be, in the business world, out and working? Because you don't, not everybody needs to be, um, in any traditional format here. I love to see the business world, quite frankly, needs the softening that intuitive energies bring. And I think that's where this is so important. And I love to see, children, adults try to bring this stuff in. And, because I said early on, I knew that there are certain things I didn't want. I didn't like emotion. So I said, I'm just going to figure out a way that I can use this with my business, and I'm just going to be settled and be happy. And then I realized that I could maybe develop systems to help other people and other businesses and stuff. So that's where it all kind of came from. I knew I didn't fit a traditional mold. I knew I would get bored just doing certain tasks all the time. And I figured, well, this works. It excites me. And that's where I think it's so important that as you're reaching out, you're showing people, and we're normalizing this to a certain extent. That's what I think, you don't have to give up your plans to be a musician or some type of trade worker or anything else. The psychic skill set is still readily available and can be used to make you a much better whatever it is you choose to be.
That's absolutely, absolutely correct. And just like what you said, my son he's already told me he has no desire to be like a medium doing readings for people, but he wants to be an inventor. He wants to be a scientist. So I was like, then you take those skills and you use them and you go out and invent, because it's the creative mind, and the creative mind is that intuitive mind. You go out and use it to bring through these new innovations and breakthroughs. And I think a lot of your big business leaders are intuitive people. They tap into that, to the visionaries. They tap into being able to tie into those inspirations that they pull through and use that intuition in that way. Albert Einstein, I mean, he came up with,
Exactly.
I love this story because Albert Einstein came up with E=mc². He intuitively came up with it. After he came up with that, they went back and proved the theory. He went back to do that, but he intuitively received it without any real proof or rationale. It just made sense to him. But so you can get those kind of breakthroughs that you just know that it's the right thing to do, and you feel into that because of these intuitive abilities. So I love what you're doing, Pete, with your work and in this conversation, to show people a real life example of how it can be used in a different area, in a different way. And that one of the things for schools, like children who are highly intuitive tend to make big picture leaps, and they see the big picture differently and more easily than, and it's not that there's no right or wrong. It's not that one's better than the other, but people who have linear thinking, like I always say, my son, the way most kids are in schools, teacher A, B, C, 1, 2, 3. But your intuitive thinkers, like my son and like we are, you can make those leaps of A, B, C, X, Y, Z, because you can get to the big picture faster. But that's where it gets tough for kids, because the kids who have this trait of high intuition, because they make those leaps, sometimes the details get boring, or they have to wait for other people to catch up to their thinking. And so sometimes that can look like these children are not engaged in the classroom, or not paying attention, or not, but it's because they think differently. They may be at the end already when you're still midway through something. And so they're now off thinking the next big thought. So that's just something. And then you're doing that with the adults, with how you're having them tap in. You're letting them bring the whole person into the business world and using that intuitive side. So I think that's just absolutely wonderful. So I'm going to fast forward now from that, because I think that's great what you're doing there. And how you said you started seeing this in your children. So when did you first recognize it in them? And then how did you start to work with it or handle it with your kids?
They were fairly young at the time, and they had, I think, just kind of begin speaking, at least at a rudimentary level. And I would see my daughter cover her ears. If there was a tension-filled something on a television show, she'd ask me to please fast forward through it. There was things that I recognized in myself, and it just took me back to that exact thing. I couldn't stand. I would leave the room. We couldn't forward television years ago, but I would leave the room if there was a tension-filled moment or conflict, because it was too much. and or the sounds were so loud or this, and I began to recognize some of the similar stuff in my kids. I was like, oh man. So I realized that's when I need to get a grip on it, and I started to learn and do everything that I could to develop and understand and be able to name things so that I could support them. And this was, I just didn't want them to have that struggle or to feel, in some cases, what I felt was isolation at times. So, I began to work with them, and we've approached it from the standpoint that it is a normal, everyday part of life to have these perceptions. For most people, some people, anybody can paint a painting. Some people make a masterpiece. Some people do a paint by number, but everybody can paint. And it's where, I said, accept it for what's coming in. We kept it always as a constant and open target around the table where we could discuss things or perceptions, or when they recognize that, someone is in the room, we just talk about it and make it an everyday normal thing. There's nothing spooky or out of the ordinary or odd or special for that reason about it. It's just a normal conversation. And that's where, I didn't want them to feel like there are kids that I have noticed that, sometimes they almost get pushed into being a circus performer. They'll say something and they, do that, do this, show me this, show me that. And I'm like, you don't want that. You don't need that pressure. So my thing was, I have taught them ways where they can use their skills. They don't have to announce it to the world. They can just use them in a very commonplace way. And that's where, it makes them very comfortable with it. They don't, there are people that they may or may not have told friends. I really don't know. I haven't discussed that with them. But I just want you to be comfortable with it so it doesn't scare you. And, my daughter's big into the ghost hunt shows right now, and we'll watch that together and we'll discuss it. But it's more, I recognized it in them. I knew as a parent that was making me have to step up. And even if I had not had these skills, I would, just knowing the information that, okay, maybe this is possibly what's going on. You've got such wonderful resources for those that maybe don't have the skill set themselves, but they can come to you and see additional stuff like that. That's why I think this is so important, because I realized I had to do something for myself, but not everybody has that. But then, you've got all the wonderful website and all the information that you've got that people can kind of, there's nothing wrong with your kid. They're just extra sensitive. They've just got a wonderful thing that they can learn to deal with. And I think, that's what I realized I had to do. They were having the stuff and they've continued to do it. And, we go out and we encounter things all the time in restaurants and places we go, or a vacation spot. But it's just, hey, what happened? Who was it? Did you talk to them? What did they say? And I validate what they are experiencing. And even as, even if a parent did not have the same skill set, just validating it and say, what did they say? Oh my gosh, that's interesting. Just listening to it and allowing them to express what the perception is incredibly helpful to them. And I think this is where I didn't really try to edit or curate anything that they were doing perception wise. I just simply said, wow, that is really neat. That's interesting. I'm glad you're experiencing that. Did anything bother you? Was that? And they begin to just kind of step into it in a normal way. And I think that's what's so important. And it allows them, because, we all know what happens when you try to stuff it down. And I think it just kind of gets it out of their system. And then my kids just go on their way. It was,
I wanted to say,
to me,
because I
it
think
doesn't, there's nothing residual. It's just all cleared out and we're done.
well, I wanted to say, I think that's such a great point. And it's wonderful that you recognize that and did that, is because just making it that every day, like it's just a normal thing, because it is a normal part of how we are, is that it lets your children stay connected to those abilities. They don't get shut down because they don't think that there's something weird or wrong with it or unusual about it, but it's just what you've done is worked it into your everyday. Like this is just, and how it is, it's okay that you've experienced that, you've seen that. you've heard that. So it helps them to know, okay, it's okay for me to share. So you've created that wonderful foundation with your children, and then validating them also helps them to know that, okay, it's okay to experience this. And I think that's beautiful. I was going to ask, how did your spouse, does she have abilities? How did she embrace all of this or work with all of this with you?
Well, I mean, she's been along for the ride also, and it's been she saw me trying to step up to the plate and do more with it as I needed to do things. And she's has been incredibly welcoming and supportive and everything during the whole conversation. She's certainly very intuitive herself.
Okay.
But it's where, we were just trying to create this kind of united front that it was okay, because I think that was the biggest thing that, we know if it gets suppressed and if you can't name something, it becomes fear, and then fear becomes illness and other issues.
Absolutely.
So that's why I just, I try to validate it. We try to make sure that there's no residual fear. We can at least call it something to bring it out. And I think that's where this stuff begins to make the difference. And, my daughter was a little more fearful in the beginning. But now, we watch those ghost hunting shows and we just go at it because we enjoy it. And she doesn't have the same fear and some of the other stuff that she had before, because now, okay, I know what that perception is. I know what this is. I don't have to be scared of it. I understand how it works.
Mhm.
And this is where, it just helps. And that's why, as I said, whether the parent has the same skill set or not, it is just that wide open listening to, because, we all know children can be a little imaginative at times also. And there can be a mix between some of the intuitive and the imaginative stuff coming through. But, I don't worry about separating those two out right now. That's just a normal part of being a kid. But we allow everything to kind of come in and settle out and get dispersed, and then nothing's left. There's no residual, because a lot of psychic kids they can have gastrointestinal problems and all types of issues where that energy isn't coming out and being processed. It sticks in and it creates all types of issues and anxiety and that. So I just felt it was my main job to say, that's great, let's talk about it. Anything else that you go, here's what I think that may be, if not, and whatever, and we just let it go. And
And
it's in and out.
what you said is absolutely true. And not just for children, it's even for adults. Because if you don't work with this energy and you don't process it, and some people don't know that they have it, and when they do finally recognize it, and this is going to be a great, tomorrow, we're going to be talking with Pat Longo, who wrote The Gifts Beneath Your Anxiety. And she talks a lot about how, we've had this conversation, how a lot of symptoms show up in the body when you don't process this energy.
Yeah.
When it's just pushed down and repressed, illnesses, just different things you can start suffering from. And you're right, children have that same issue, adults can have that same issue. And so that's why it is important to find ways to work with this energy. And with our children, I agree with what you said earlier, because even for our son, we didn't know fully when everything started open for him, we didn't recognize it. And then when we started, just what you said which is powerful, and why we put the website together and put the resources out there with all the books and information, just what you said, when you can label it, when you can understand it, then you can know how to work with it. And you put that common vocabulary around it and give your kids a common languaging, then it takes the fear out of it. It takes the fear, you start having these conversations, and then you start finding ways to help them work with it. Because children they will, since they are naturally intuitive, they can get this energy built up in their bodies, and they have to find ways, we as parents, to support them. I always mention, we brought Rebecca Kramer-Fiskell in about Let Them Move, and how children who are intuitive need more movement, and just finding ways. And we're going to have, at the end of February, we're having our first kids meetup, where we're going to start looking at having different exercise games and art, and for them to meet each other, but fun, where they won't even realize it's intuitive exercises that's helping them to process that energy, letting them process it out, because you don't want it stuck in the body, because it does, it shows up in different ways. Sometimes some kids have been misdiagnosed with like ADHD or ADD or different things. It's just unprocessed intuitive energy. So as parents, find ways to help them to process it and let go of that energy, then they settle into themselves and they're fine. So wonderful points, absolutely wonderful points that you're bringing up, Pete. So, and I love to hear what you're doing with your children. And this gives an idea we all learn from each other. So people hearing your story and hearing this can take hopefully some nuggets away to help them understand this better and to work with their children better. So one of the things I was going to ask you at this, and there's so many more topics and ways that areas and things that we can go into this, but I wanted to ask you just to kind of start wrapping this up a little bit, what pieces of advice would you give? I'm going to take this on two levels because I love what you talked about with the business. For people who, advice for people who are wanting to use these abilities, or even how can, like you're using it in business, how would you recommend to somebody who's hearing this, maybe a business person, to invite that into their environment, as one question? And then, like 2 or 3 suggestions or tips you would give to parents with intuitive children from your experience that you've learned that you found helpful.
As far as the business is concerned, the way that I would approach it is that whatever your business is, look at what the primary decisions that you are making on a daily basis. What is it I'm trying to determine, decide, choose from, or do on a daily basis? And that can be from hiring people or checking numbers or doing anything like that. Find out what those major and primary decisions you're making, and then try to develop a system where you can test and validate with psychic things. So, I would kind of say to myself, and, once again, not everything's going to work. But the one point I will make, and I discovered this early on, is that the practicing of one psychic skill enhances all the others. So you don't have to practice, clairvoyance separate from audience. You don't have to. Any practicing of a psychic skill expands them all. So this is where I realized, well, okay, if I just somehow want to know if a column is wrong or added up incorrectly, and there's 50 gazillion numbers in there, or there's a mistake or an error, I want somehow to see that or to know that. Don't know what it is. I just kind of started to throw these things out there and to see what would work. And this is where, I played with any number of different systems. If I had 2 people we were trying to hire, I'd try to bring them up at my third eye and see who walked toward me versus who walked backwards. Would that work? Did this become a repeatable system? You just try and have fun. I kept track. I would have fun with the various ways to do it. And then I would try to find ways that, wow, that really worked. And then I'm very specific with the way that I write out, but make little tests or games or anything with your decisions, and then try to find a way to test it. And of course, I keep track of everything. So on the days that I think, God, that really didn't go right, I can go back and look at all the other ones that were right. So I keep track. That's in a spreadsheet, but you talked about keeping a achievement log or a intuition log, which is perfect for a little more everyday things. I just know I keep track of if I participated with a particular hiring, has that person been here the long term, all of that type of stuff. So look at your primary decisions and try to find fun ways to engage your intuitive stuff. That's the way that I approach the business. And any number of stuff that we do in the building here, I've kind of found little tricks and stuff that I will, okay, I know that there's something wrong. You guys need to stop. And that's how we figure it out. So with the kids, it's the same way. I kind of, I just welcome any intuitive thought, perception, anything they have. And sometimes it can be a little scary. Sometimes it can be whatever. But I think at this point in time, it's my job to validate their perceptions, to help them hone them in a way that they can use them without it, becoming a parade or a big thing. I want them to be able to walk through life, have a perception, notice it, deal with it, and keep going. You don't have to tell everybody that their grandmother's standing behind them, but you can say, geez, that's a beautiful necklace. I bet, was that your grandmother's? You can do it in some way to not make a big deal out of it. So I'm teaching them ways to kind of walk through the world and engage and do it and use the skills. And it's not that they're hiding anything. If somebody asks, they admit to it. But it's the fact of, not everything has to be a show. Mm-hmm. And quite often we have to go through the world and make the best decisions and you know, any type of games and other stuff that allows them just to be, I want that radar to constantly be working, but not everybody has to know about it initially. And therefore they feel quite confident with, some of their decisions. We're getting the energy out. And most importantly, I think anybody that has a really kid with a big psychic skill set, my wife does the Eden energy stuff. And, caring for the physical body is a big part of being a psychic and a medium also.
That's right.
That's being able to process, clear out, clear yourself, get regrounded. And so, my kids are pretty good with like running little energetic routines where they can clean themselves off. That we were really good with that where their COVID was concerned. And we wanted to make sure that they can ground themselves. Because half the time that built up anxiety, if you look at them, they look like a big lollipop tree energetically, because it's all up in their head.
Right.
So we get it back down. So, kind of teaching the kid that energetically they need to watch out for themselves and just ground themselves, put their feet on the bare ground for 5 minutes, whatever they need to do. That's important to helping them out. And then we just validate and teach them ways that they can just incorporate it into their everyday life, because then they're going to use it more.
That's everything you said is absolutely beautiful, just is perfect. And one of the things that I'm going to also echo you, because we do the same with our son, is that we had the benefit of, we were on television, but even outside of that place of things, we don't push him with this. Like you said, it's every day, it's normal. It's not for him to be out, or any child. When they're a child, you keep a child a child. It's not out for them to start reading at 13 years old, unless that's really like, if they're feeling called and you work that out with them. But let children be children, help them to learn ways to process it. And at whatever point, when they feel they're ready, it will come out for them on how they're going to use it and in what area they're going to use it. And like we talked about, it can be whatever they're being called to. But as parents, I do agree that it's not something you want to push your kid like, oh, look at what my kid can do. This is just, let them be a kid, let them learn how to work with it. You learn how to work with it with your child by joining groups like our highly intuitive, the kids parent group, and there's other groups out there. But just join something to educate yourself. The more parents educate themselves, the more they can help their children. And that's what you growing up, having this ability, Pete, and then knowing and taking on to study. And that's the key is get books, get with intuitives, get with people you can have conversations with, listen to videos like this, reach out. We have, you can reach out to highlyintuitivekids@gmail.com. I work with people. We have other mediums, intuitives, and folks out there working with people, so we can make the connection. And we want to start getting this where folks don't feel alone. That's the big thing. You're not alone. There's resources, there's information, there's people willing to help work with you. Lots of resources out there. It's sometimes you have to dig for it, and that's what our website is doing. And we'll be adding even more information to it, so you don't have to dig for it. You go to one place, it's right there to be able to help you and your family. But
Well,
Pete,
it's a beautiful job. The website, I think it's excellent. And I said, the information is there. And I think this is just I love what you're doing, because this just brings it forward. Because I really don't know of any other resource of this nature going on like this. And I think that's why I just applaud you for what you're doing.
Oh, well, thank you. And I don't take full credit, Spirit. I started getting downloads in 2021 after we were on the show. And I believe that was just Spirit's way of moving us, giving us a platform to really open the door for us to help people, and started getting downloads of information to put these resources together to give them to families so that we can help our children. That's the help in the future, because more and more kids are coming in so connected, and this isn't going to change. It's just the nature of things shifting for humanity at this time. And so we need to catch up and keep up with these new generation of children that are coming in, and be able to give them the support that they need. So thank you so much, Pete, for being willing to have this conversation with me. I feel like we just scratched the surface of things, but this is a wonderful, wonderful conversation. I appreciate you coming forward, because you give a whole new perspective. Love hearing the male perspective on how you're using your abilities in the way that you're doing and in the business world, and just showing people that you can use it in whatever your profession, whatever you're called
Yeah.
to do. You don't have to just be out doing readings for folks, and you can find ways to incorporate it into your work. Pete did it. I was a business person. I did it. I know there's lots of other people out there doing it. So we just keep the conversation going. So thank you
Wonderful.
so much. Thank you so much. I truly appreciate it. And so we'll wrap this one up, and we'll be looking forward to doing another sharing our stories. If anybody has a story they'd like to come forward and share, please reach out at highlyintuitivekids@gmail.com. At highlyintuitivekids@gmail.com. That's right. So we can just keep the conversation going. There's lots of people, lots of interesting stories that are going to help, and we learn and help each other by sharing our stories. So thank you very much.
Wonderful. Thank you again. I appreciate the opportunity.
Great. I totally appreciate you doing this with me, Pete.